Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you were just tuning in, we just finished talking about a thrilling double overtime game that saw Connor McDavid score the double overtime game winner just about a minute into the period. Leon Draisaitl extended his 13-game point streak now, and the Oilers go up 1-0 on the Dallas Stars. In segment two, we talked a little bit about the NCAA settlement, and in segment one, we talked about the Celtics going up 2-0 on the Pacers with Tyrese Haliburton going down. In segment four here, we are going to move into some baseball talk. There's been some rule changes. No glasses today. Lots of rule changes going on in the MLB recently. They put the pitch clock in, and the robot umpires have been being tested out in AAA for quite some time. They are not going to be making the move to the MLB next season, and we'll talk about whether or not it's a good idea and whether or not it's a good idea to even have them in the future. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything you would like me to talk about, go ahead and put it in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Once again, that link to leave a tip or donation is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, we're going to move off of the ice onto the diamond here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the possibility of robo umpires. Robot umpires, there's a lot of different ways that this could go, and there's a lot of pushback in a lot of different circles, right? The idea that you have to get these strikes and balls calls right are obviously a huge part of the game. You know, you want to get these calls correct, because as we're seeing a lot, it can really affect the game. There's this great Twitter account, the it's like the ump grading. I forget exactly what it's called, but they put out a little graphic after every single game grading the umpires, and it's a really cool thing to see. You see how much it affects games and how biased some of it is. They're what their zone is looking like, just from extrapolating the data. It's very interesting. Excuse me. It's a very interesting page to go and look at. Umpires are getting it right in the MLB about 92% of the time, which is really really good is a really good clip. You know, it's up almost 15% in the last since 2008. So it's been continuously going up, but it's still to the point where they're making egregiously bad calls. And there's umpires, generally, if you're an umpire or a ref, you don't want people to know your name. If they know your name, it's not a good thing. And there's this one umpire, Angel Hernandez, that if you're following baseball, just about anybody knows, because his strike zone is famously horrendous. So there's a lot of different solutions. Robots are taking over. Like you said, Kelsey, their NFL is looking at getting rid of the chain gang, and they're trying that out in postseason, in the preseason, excuse me. They're trying that out in the preseason to see if it works better. The UFL, the spring league, is currently using that. So it works well over there. It's pretty quick. They don't have any chains for measurements. They have the physical yard markers out there, but they're just there so the players on the field can see where the sticks are, which I think is what they're going to end up switching to. It's a small change that doesn't really affect anything, but the more obvious one would be in baseball. And there's a couple different ways that they've been talking about implementing something like this. The first one is full robots, you know, fully automated strike zone. The umpire behind the plate. It's not getting rid of umpires entirely, because you need the umpires there to call if a runner is safe or out at the plate, or all those other calls that are subjective and can't just be done really quickly by a robot just yet. So umpires, it's not like putting the umpires in there. Putting the robo ump is going to get rid of umpires entirely, right? It's not like we're gonna make this change and there's not gonna be anybody behind the plate. It's just gonna change exactly what their job description is. Another way that they've been doing it is in AAA, which is what I think they should do, is they have a challenge system. And I know some people are opposed to challenges in sports. They think it slows it down, but if there's a ball or strike the batter disagrees with, all they need to do is do the little challenge system. And then right away they'll buzz the machine will buzz into the home plate umpire and it'll tell them if they're right or wrong. You know, it's if you don't get punished for getting it wrong, but it can help, and you also can't do it all the time, but only on egregious calls. And I think that's what they're going to end up doing. The idea of not putting it in, I think, again, we've talked about a lot about change in this episode with the NCAA and its sweeping changes, but people in general don't like change. It's one of the things. It doesn't really matter if it's going to help or how little it's going to change. Whenever change happens, whether it be sports or really anything else in the world, people are resistant to it because oh, it could be awful, but also it could be good, and this is the kind of change that's not going to affect much, and people aren't going to notice. If you remember when they put the pitch clock in recently, everybody was saying, "Oh, it's going to completely ruin the game and the pace of baseball," and it's definitely quickened the pace, but it's a good thing. You see these compilations of pitchers taking three pitches in the time it takes an entire inning to be pitched nowadays. And people are now blaming the increase of pitcher injuries on that, but there's a lot of other things. I think the pitcher injury epidemic is more on pitchers throwing harder than ever before, pitchers throwing with more spin than ever before, and not having the sticky stuff as an agent to help them get that spin. Pitchers are, being more explosive, and they're hitting the physical limits of the human body. Kelsey asks what happens when they go beyond the clock time. If the pitcher goes beyond it, it's an automatic ball. If the batter goes beyond it, it's an automatic strike. So there's a punishment there, and it hasn't really changed the game of baseball too much right now. It hasn't gone and changed the way that the game is run, and generally you don't see too many violations. Now, the in the first ever spring training when this happened, you saw a bunch of violations, but it's been a season and a half now at this point. Yeah, it's a fair system, I think, and I don't have any issues with it, and I think most people don't have an issue with it. It just leads to quicker games. It's getting more people to watch baseball. It keeps the excitement of the game of baseball that, to be fair, is very slow. And I'm a big baseball fan. I grew up watching baseball. I was lucky to grow up when I started getting into baseball. I grew up around the Washington D.C. area. When I started to get into baseball, the Nationals were good right away. Like I kind of started getting into baseball right when the Nationals started getting good. So really, that always helps you start to love a sport more. But that's not always how it works around the country. There's teams, but baseball is not an easy sport to get into because it's slow and it's boring. And if you're watching it on the TV, I completely understand. I struggle to watch a full baseball game on the TV nowadays, just because again it's slow. But going to baseball stadiums going to baseball stadiums is, in my opinion, the greatest place, is the greatest live sport event to go to, because in these other live sport events it feels like you have to, basketball or hockey, you have your eye on the action at all times and it doesn't stop, and that's a good thing. But if you just want like a nice relaxed day, you go to a ballpark, enjoy the day out, go hang out with friends. I love going to baseball games. It's my favorite live sport to go to. But that's besides the point. That's a whole nother discussion. Robot umps not being in here, like I said, I don't think it's going to be a change that people are going to affect. It's going to be one of those things that happens once or twice a game where a player's like, "I think you got that wrong, ump. Let's do a little replay." And it should fix the game. It should stop these huge swings from happening. Now, there has to be some kind of limit to it, and I'm sure they're still figuring it out. I hope that this gets implemented soon because I am tired of watching baseball games and having strikes called that are unhittable, and it doesn't happen that often. Like I said, umps are pretty good at their job, and referees in most sports are pretty good at their job, but we only notice them when they do a bad job. If you're an ump, you don't want to get noticed. If you're a ref, you don't want to get noticed, and for the most part they do a good job. 92% is a pretty good job. But there's always those bad calls, and we want to get those bad calls eliminated from the game as much as possible. And I think having this challenge system is a great first step. And we can expand from there if we need. We can go to the fully robot zone if we need in the future. But I think implementing this challenge system for batters to challenge batters or pitchers to get challenged is something that should get called. Kelsey, did that happen today? I haven't seen that Aaron Judge got tossed. But yeah, that's always going to be a part of baseball, and baseball has more old heads than any other sport. So it's always change is always tough to happen, especially in a sport that has so many older fans. 2 or 3 weeks ago, yeah, no, stuff like that happens all the time, and that's why I'm a fan of this Robo Ump system. It doesn't have to overhaul the entirety of the way that the calls are made, but it can help keep the game running smoother and avoid situations like Aaron Judge getting cost on a bad call. But yeah, speaking of Aaron Judge, actually, we're going to talk a little bit about the Yankees in our fifth and final segment here today. We're going to move into the Yankees GM came out and said we're spending too much money, which is, if you've a baseball historian at this point, I guess, 'cause that's 20 years ago, the Yankees were famous for being the big spenders, and that kind of is the opposite of what they've been known for. So we'll talk a little bit about that and what that means for baseball in the future. So stick around. We'll be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.